Welcome to VNT. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. It began with a moment that would send shockwaves through both Washington and the world. With a bold declaration that would come to define the Trump presidency, the former president took the stage, his words echoing across the nation and beyond. On September 26, 2025, President Trump announced what he called a monumental victory for the American economy. In front of cameras and a captivated audience, he claimed that South Korea had agreed to invest a staggering $350 billion in the United States. This was touted as an upfront commitment, an unprecedented injection of capital, promising to create thousands of jobs, revitalize American industry, and spark a new era of economic growth. The announcement was classic Trump, grand in scale, strikingly specific, and presented as if the deal was already sealed and the benefits imminent. The message was carefully crafted for a domestic audience, painting Trump as a leader who could extract huge concessions from America's trading partners and put the country's interests first. The $350 billion figure was staggering, almost unimaginable, suggesting a flood of foreign money pouring into the U.S. economy and validating the administration's tough, often controversial, trade stance. The use of the word upfront implied immediate action, a tangible benefit that would be felt right away, all stemming from a new tariff agreement negotiated by the Trump team. For Trump's supporters, it was the ultimate proof that America First was more than just a slogan. It was a strategy that was finally paying off. But in the world of international diplomacy, such grand announcements often tell only half the story. Behind the headlines, the reality is often far more complex and nuanced. As the White House celebrated its apparent triumph, officials in South Korea were waking up to a very different reality, one that would soon challenge the narrative coming out of Washington. The response from Seoul was swift and direct, leaving little room for ambiguity or misinterpretation. Less than 24 hours after Trump's declaration, South Korea's national security advisor, Ri Sung-lak, stepped before the cameras and publicly refuted the claim, making sure the world was watching. He stated unequivocally that South Korea could not and had not agreed to pay $350 billion in cash up front, directly contradicting the narrative coming from Washington. Ri explained that such a sum was simply impossible, representing a huge portion of South Korea's entire GDP, and far beyond what any government could realistically commit to in a single payment. The statement was designed to make clear that the terms described by Trump were not feasible, and that Seoul would not be pressured into an agreement that defied economic logic. The public nature of this rebuttal was significant. Such disagreements are usually handled quietly between allies, behind closed doors and away from the media spotlight. Seoul's open contradiction signaled deep frustration and a breakdown in private negotiations, hinting at growing mistrust and a widening rift between the two governments. The presidential office reinforced that it would not be rushed into a deal that could harm its national interest, emphasizing that any agreement must be carefully considered and in line with the country's priorities. The narrative had shifted from a seemingly triumphant deal to a contentious, very public standoff, with both sides now digging in, and the world watching to see what would happen next. To understand the deadlock, look at the deal's structure. The U.S. had imposed a 25% tariff on South Korean imports, hurting Korea's export-driven economy. In exchange for tariff relief, South Korea was to make a substantial investment in the U.S. The deal would lower tariffs to 15%, providing relief to Korean manufacturers. The $350 billion figure represented a long-term investment, not an immediate cash payment. South Korea envisioned gradual expansion by major corporations, Samsung, Hyundai, LG, over several years. The U.S., however, pushed for a large, immediate cash infusion. This demand shifted the agreement from a strategic partnership to a one-sided transaction. The core dispute: gradual corporate-led investment versus a massive, upfront government-backed payment. This misunderstanding brought negotiations to a halt. At the heart of the stalemate is a clash over how international investment works. The U.S. wants a large, upfront payment, proof of a successful negotiation. This approach prioritizes political optics and immediate results. South Korea, meanwhile, insists that such a cash infusion is unrealistic and contrary to market principles. The investment was always meant to come from private companies, not the government. Forcing companies to make a politically motivated transfer would damage their competitiveness. Seoul's commitment is real, but must be realized through phased, strategic decisions. Both sides are now locked in a standoff, with tariffs threatening to snap back. Negotiators are scrambling for a resolution before the APEC summit. The outcome will shape not just this deal, but the future of U.S. trade negotiations. The breakdown of U.S.-South Korea talks is being watched closely by other allies, especially Canada and the EU. For these countries, the outcome is more than just a distant diplomatic event. It's a signal that the rules of global trade are shifting in real time, and that no partnership is immune to sudden change. For them, the dispute is a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of U.S. trade policy under America First. The uncertainty has forced policymakers and business leaders to rethink their assumptions about the reliability of the U.S. as a trading partner. Canada, having faced its own tough negotiations over the USMCA, recognizes the pressure tactics and sudden reversals. Canadian officials remember the uncertainty and last-minute demands that characterize their talks with Washington, and see echoes of that experience in the Korean standoff. The Korean standoff validates Canadian concerns and fuels efforts to diversify away from U.S. dependence. Canadian businesses are now more determined than ever to build new relationships in Asia and Europe, seeking markets that offer greater predictability and less political risk. The EU too has faced threats of tariffs and sees the Korean deal as further evidence of the risks in dealing with Washington. European leaders are increasingly vocal about the need to protect their economies from abrupt policy shifts coming from the U.S. allies, are reassessing their economic strategies, seeking more stable partnerships elsewhere. They are exploring new trade agreements, investing in alternative supply chains, and strengthening ties with emerging markets. The perception is growing that the U.S. is no longer the anchor of global economic stability. Markets are reacting to this uncertainty, and investors are watching closely as global power dynamics shift. This shift is pragmatic, not personal. Nations are hedging their bets. They are making calculated moves to protect their economies from future shocks, knowing that the old certainties can no longer be taken for granted. Economic security now means finding partners who are consistent and reliable. The search for trustworthy allies is reshaping the global trade landscape as countries look beyond traditional alliances. The U.S. risks losing its central role in the global economic system as others step forward to fill the void and redefine the future of international trade. Financial markets often react instantly to geopolitical news. When South Korea publicly refuted Trump's announcement, many expected market turmoil. Yet the reaction was surprisingly calm. The iShares MSCI South Korea ETF actually rose. Investors seem to view Seoul's firm stance as a positive, not a crisis. The market had already priced in uncertainty around U.S. trade policy. Investors are now accustomed to dramatic trade announcements from Washington. Markets wait for confirmation from all parties before reacting. The stability suggests confidence in South Korea's economic fundamentals. Investors trust that Seoul will protect its companies and act pragmatically. The financial world is more focused on economic reality than political theater. This standoff is more than a numbers dispute. It's a crossroads for America's alliances. The immediate question: can negotiators find a compromise before the APEC summit? A new framework could allow both sides to claim victory. Trump with a big commitment, Seoul with a realistic timeline. Failure could see tariffs return, damaging both economies and relations. But the deeper damage is to trust. Allies now see the risks of negotiating with an administration that values headlines over substance. The U.S. was once the predictable anchor of the global system. That reputation is now in question. Nations are becoming more cautious, seeking security in diversified partnerships. The real legacy may be the trust that was lost, not the money that was promised. Rebuilding confidence will require a return to predictable, respectful diplomacy, where partnership and trust matter as much as profit.